Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a really profound exploration, diving deep into Peter Attia's groundbreaking book, Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity.
Hmm.
And this isn't just, another chat about maybe adding a few extra years to your life. It's really about a fundamental shift, a paradigm shift in how we think about living, aging, and crucially, how we can actually live better for longer.
That's the key phrase, isn't it? Better for longer.
Exactly. Because for so long, this whole longevity quest has felt a bit like searching for some, I don't know, mythical fountain of youth. It's been plagued by these quick fixes, dodgy supplements, promises of magic pills that, let's be honest, usually fall flat.
Yeah, the snake oil salesman approach.
Right. But what we're going to uncover today, looking at Dr. Attia's work, is that the real path. Well, it's far more scientific, it's incredibly nuanced, and actually there's even a bit of an art to applying it.
Definitely. It's not just about following a rigid set of rules.
Our mission here, then, is to go way beyond the superficial stuff. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from this really transformative book and equip you, our listener, with actionable, evidence-informed insights.
Think of it as a way to get up to speed quickly, right? A shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on a topic that, frankly, affects every single one of us.
Absolutely. It's about elevating your understanding to a whole new level. So let's get into it. Let's unpack this together.
Okay. And what's really fascinating, I think, is where Dr. Attia starts his whole journey. It's not with, complex scientific data points, but with this deeply personal, almost haunting recurring dream.
The falling eggs dream, right?
Yeah, exactly. He describes it so vividly. He's standing on this grimy city sidewalk, holding a fragile basket, looking up at these rooftops. And every few seconds, wham, an egg comes hurtling down, just tossed carelessly.
And he's just desperately trying to catch them.
Frantically running around, basket outstretched, trying to catch every single one before it smashes. But he can't. It's impossible. Many, maybe even most, miss the basket, splattering yellow yolk all over the pavement. He talks about this overwhelming sense of futility, just wishing it would stop.
That's a powerful image. And this dream, it stuck with him for decades.
2 decades, yeah.
Yeah.
And the meaning really clicked into place during his surgical residency at Johns Hopkins. He was training to be a cancer surgeon, specifically dealing with the absolute worst cases of pancreatic cancer, often end-stage stuff. It was relentless, heartbreaking work.
Pancreatic cancer, that's notoriously difficult.
Extremely. And the symbolism of the dream just becomes painfully clear. He explains how this cancer grows silently, insidiously. It often goes completely undetected until it's reached this advanced, almost untreatable stage.
So the surgeries he was doing, like the Whipple procedure, they were last resorts?
Pretty much. The Whipple is this incredibly complex, grueling operation, taking out the head of the pancreas. Gallbladder, part of the bile duct, part of the small intestine. It's dangerous, difficult, and often, a last desperate hope.
But they got good at the surgery itself.
Amazingly good. He mentions over 99% of patients survived the procedure, which is incredible. But here's the gut punch. Nearly all of them would still die from the disease within a few short years.
So the eggs still hit the ground.
The eggs still hit the ground every single time, despite all their skill and effort. And this, day in, day out, led him to this profound, inescapable realization. The real answer wasn't just getting better at catching the falling eggs, at treating these late-stage diseases.
It was about stopping them from being thrown in the first place.
Exactly. Finding a way to get to the top of that metaphorical building and prevent the disease from ever starting its catastrophic fall. And he makes the point, this isn't just a doctor's problem. It's a metaphor for how we all often approach health reactively scrambling rather than proactively preventing.
That's such a clear and really memorable way to frame it. And it leads right into his observation about what he calls the 2 speeds of death.
During his residency in Baltimore, especially in the trauma wards, he saw a lot of quick deaths. The immediate, brutal results of gunshots, knife wounds, terrible car accidents.
Right, acute trauma.
Acute trauma. And he says, those were unsettling, obviously. Immediate, brutal. But surprisingly, it was the slow deaths that really got under his skin. They're ones that unfolded gradually over years.
The chronic diseases.
The chronic diseases, cancer, cardiovascular problems, neurodegenerative decline. These felt different. They weren't wounds from sudden external forces, but from these slow, unseen biological processes.
And they affected everyone, regardless of status.
That's what really disturbed him. He says, cancer didn't care how rich you were or who your surgeon was. If it wanted to find a way to kill you, it would. These slow, drawn-out deaths became far more unsettling for him. It highlighted this sense that modern medicine, for all its power, seemed almost helpless against this slow march.
Which brings us to his own personal wake-up call, the thing that really forced him to shift his thinking. His Catalina Island moment.
Ah, yes. 2009, he'd just done this incredible endurance feat swimming 21 miles from LA to Catalina Island. Took him 14 grueling hours.
Wow. He must have felt invincible.
Absolutely. He felt like an elite athlete, celebrated with a cheeseburger. And then his wife, Jill, looks at him and says, quite honestly, Peter, I think you should try to be less skinny.
Ouch. After swimming the channel.
Right. Must have stung a bit.
Yeah.
He was 210 pounds, heavier than his teenage boxing weight. Already had a bit of a dad bod, as he describes it, even before kids. But the real shocker came from his blood tests.
Despite all that exercise and what he thought was healthy
The
eating.
results were alarming. Significant insulin resistance, a major precursor to type 2 diabetes, and his testosterone. Bottom 5th percentile for his age, 36. A total mismatch with how he saw himself.
And then there was his family history.
That was the terrifying part. A history littered with men dying young, in their 40s, from heart disease. And a final nail in the coffin, his own coronary artery calcium score. At just 36 years old, it was 6.
Which should be.
0. Absolute 0 at that age.
Yeah.
A score of 6 meant undeniable arterial damage, the kind you'd expect in someone maybe 55 or older.
So putting it all together, the blood tests, the family history, the calcium score.
It was his undeniable wake-up call. He realized with chilling clarity he was already well down the path to an early, slow death, just like his uncle's. This wasn't just an abstract problem he saw in patients anymore. It was his problem. His own egg was falling.
And this personal crisis really crystallized his critique of our current medical system, what he calls medicine 2.0.
Exactly. He realized medicine 2.0 is fundamentally flawed in how it deals with the 4 horsemen of chronic disease.
The big killers. Heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, and type 2 diabetes or metabolic dysfunction.
Those 4. And he acknowledges medicine 2.0 is brilliant at the quick death stuff. Fixing broken bones, fighting infections with antibiotics, supporting failing organs, pulling people back from the brink. It's amazing at catching those acute, sudden eggs.
But not the slow ones.
No. He says it's far less successful at helping patients with chronic diseases escape slow death. We can manage symptoms, maybe delay the end a bit, but we can't really reset the clock, reverse the underlying disease process.
That's a huge point. Why are we so good at emergencies but struggle so much with these chronic conditions that are now the biggest killers?
That's the absolute core of his argument. Medicine 2.0 intervenes at the wrong time point. Think about cancer. It often starts silently, growing for years, even decades, before it's detectable or causes symptoms.
Same with heart disease, right? It can build up for decades.
20 years or more, silently accumulating damage before that sudden heart attack. By the time Medicine 2.0 steps in, reacting to a symptom or a diagnosis, the disease is already deeply rooted. We're basically waiting for the egg to plummet instead of stopping the thrower. That's the central failure he's trying to fix.
It's a powerful indictment. And he shares that story from his residency about the gentamicin dosage that really highlights the system's rigidity.
Yeah, that's a telling one. A critical care patient needed gentamicin, an antibiotic with a really narrow safety window. Too little is ineffective, too much is toxic.
Right, very tricky to dose.
And Attia, with his background in math and engineering, had calculated the exact optimal time for the next dose, 4:30 a.m. His model predicted that's when the patient's blood levels would need the next hit.
And the levels confirmed it.
They did. 4:30 a.m., the levels were right where they needed to be for the next dose. But his supervisor, sticking rigidly to the hospital protocol, said, nope, wait until 7 a.m. next shift.
Leaving the patient unprotected for hours.
Over 2.5 hours, potentially letting a fatal infection gain ground. Attia couldn't stand it. He convinced the nurse to give the drug anyway, defied the order.
And got in trouble for it.
Big trouble. Publicly reprimanded, threatened with dismissal. He was shocked. Shouldn't they always be looking for better ways, prioritizing the patient over some arbitrary schedule? It really shaped his view on the inflexibility of Medicine 2.0.
Which connects to his critique of that foundational principle, first, do no harm. He really takes that apart.
He does. He argues it's often more of a hindrance. First, he points out, Hippocrates never actually said it quite like that. The original was more nuanced. To help, or at least to do no harm. Second, he calls the modern simplified version hypocritical nonsense, pointing out that for centuries, medical treatments like bloodletting probably did way more harm than good.
True. Medicine wasn't always beneficial.
And third, and this is key, He argues it fosters this risk-averse culture where doing nothing seems like the safest option. But sometimes doing nothing is the most harmful thing.
Like the stabbing victim example.
Exactly. The 17-year-old bleeding out in the ER, waiting for the sterile OR would have been fatal. Attia had to crack his chest open right there. Incredibly risky, caused immediate harm, but is the only way to save his life. The point is, risk isn't something to avoid blindly. It needs to be understood, analyzed, managed. Sometimes inaction is the biggest risk of all.
So if Medicine 2.0 is great for crises but flawed for chronic disease, how did we get here? And what's this Medicine 3.0 vision?
Well, a quick history lesson helps. Medicine 1.0, the Hippocratic era, lasted thousands of years. Based on observation, speculation, think four humors. Its big contribution was realizing diseases were natural, not divine punishment, but it lacked scientific method.
Then came the big leap.
Medicine 2.0, mid-19th century. Driven by the germ theory, Pasteur, Lister, Koch, understanding microbes led to antibiotics, antiseptics, hygiene.
This is where Ignaz Semmelweis fits in, right? The hand-washing pioneer who got rejected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A tragic but crucial story. Semmelweis saw horrific death rates from childbed fever in maternity wards. He noticed doctors went from dissecting cadavers straight to delivering babies without washing hands.
Ugh.
He didn't know about germs yet, but he figured some cadaverous particles are being transferred. He mandated hand washing with chlorinated lime. Mortality rates plummeted.
But the establishment hated it.
Hated it. They were offended by the idea they were causing disease. He was ridiculed, dismissed, died in an asylum. Heartbreakingly, Lister proved antiseptic surgery worked the same year Semmelweis died. He was vindicated, but too late.
So Medicine 2.0 gave us the scientific method, amazing breakthroughs.
Absolutely. Eradicating smallpox, controlling polio, managing HIV, curing Hep C, the rapid COVID vaccines, monumental triumphs. But Attia argues its major blind spot is far less success combating long-term diseases like cancer.
Because most lifespan gains came from fighting infections.
Overwhelmingly, yes. Better sanitation, vaccines, antibiotics. That's where the big jumps in life expectancy came from in the early 20th century. Mortality from other chronic causes hasn't dropped nearly as dramatically since then.
Which leads us to Medicine 3.0. It sounds like it requires a whole new way of thinking.
A complete overhaul. The goal isn't just patching things up or extending life at all costs. It's preventing tumors from starting, avoiding that first heart attack, stopping the slide into Alzheimer's. It's intervening way earlier, decades before symptoms.
And technology is finally catching up to make this possible, like the self-driving car analogy.
Exactly. The idea of precision medicine has been around, but the tech wasn't there.
Yeah.
Like early self-driving cars were just a brick on the accelerator. Now with AI, sensors, computing power, it's becoming real.
And in medicine.
Things like continuous glucose monitors, CGMs. They give real-time, personalized metabolic data that was impossible a decade ago. This tech enables the tailored, proactive approach of Medicine 3.0.
So it's technology plus a new philosophy. What are the key philosophical shifts?
Four big ones. First, and most crucial, prevention over treatment. Attia asks, when did Noah build the ark? Long before it started raining. Medicine 2.0 tries to stay dry after the downpour starts. Medicine 3.0 builds the ark proactively.
Makes sense. What's second?
Viewing the patient as a unique individual. Medicine 2.0 relies heavily on average results from big clinical trials, or CTs. But nobody is truly average. Medicine 3.0 is evidence-informed, using trial data but applying it to your specific genetics, history, goals. It's bespoke, not one-size-fits-all.
Okay, number 3.
An honest assessment of risk, including the risk of doing nothing. He uses the hormone replacement therapy, HRT, example. The WHI study screamed a 24% relative increase in breast cancer risk. Panic ensued. HRT was abandoned.
But the absolute risk was tiny.
Tiny. Only 0.1% absolute increase, one extra case per 1,000 women over years. And the study wasn't representative of typical younger symptomatic women seeking HRT. Medicine 3.0 asks, is that tiny risk worth denying treatment to the specific patient suffering debilitating symptoms, especially considering the risks of not treating?
That's a critical reframing. And the fourth shift.
This is maybe the biggest.
Yeah.
The focus on health span over lifespan. Medicine 2.0 aims solely to delay death. Health span, the period free from disease and disability, was barely mentioned in his medical training.
But it's not just absence of disease, right?
No, he says, we want more out of life than merely the absence of disease or disability. We want vitality, cognitive sharpness, emotional well-being deep into our later years. Ignoring health span leads to suffering and bankrupts the healthcare system.
This sounds exactly like his Titanic analogy. Our current medical radar is just too short-sighted.
It's a chillingly perfect comparison. The Titanic got multiple ice warnings but ignored them, steaming ahead too fast. They spotted the iceberg only 500 yards away way too late.
And Medicine 2.0's radar.
It operates on a 5-7 year clinical trial time frame, maybe 10-year risk predictions. But heart disease, cancer, they develop over decades, 30, 40 years sometimes. Our radar is looking for icebergs that are already scraping the hull.
So Medicine 3.0 needs the long-range radar, the GPS, the satellite imagery, looking 30, 40 years ahead for a 40-year-old. And crucially, you, the listener, become the captain.
Precisely. You're not a passive passenger anymore. Medicine 3.0 demands you be knowledgeable, crystal clear on your goals, unflinchingly aware of your risks. You have to be willing to change habits, face challenges, step outside your comfort zone. You're actively steering the ship through the ice field.
That idea of being the captain really brings us to the importance of defining your goals for longevity. He tells that moving story about Sophie, his friend's mother.
Yeah, Becky's mom. He remembered Sophie as this incredibly vibrant, active woman, always gardening or golfing, seemingly ageless.
But then he heard from Becky years later.
And the story was tragically familiar. It started in her early 70s with a seemingly minor injury tearing a shoulder muscle gardening. That was the trigger.
Not the direct cause, but the start of the decline.
Exactly. Her back and neck pain got worse, became chronic. She couldn't garden or golf anymore. Her passions, her activity plummeted. She got depressed, became more isolated. Her world just shrank. Eventually, dementia set in, and she died at 83 from a respiratory infection.
He calls that period the marginal decade. That last stretch of life filled with decline, pain, limitations. Nobody mentioned this, he says.
Right, it's this silent reality. And that's why the core exercise he gives patients and gives you is, what do you want to be doing in your later decades? Be specific. Travel, hike, golf, play with grandkids.
It forces you to confront those long-term goals.
Yes, goals many people avoid thinking about because of hyperbolic discounting. We prefer immediate ease over future gains that require effort now. And second, it powerfully highlights the need for health span. If you want to be active and engaged in your 80s or 90s, you have to maintain your physical and cognitive function in every single decade before that. Otherwise, the gravitational pull of aging wins and you default to a marginal decade, not bonus decades.
He shows this visually with that lifespan and health span graph. The black line is the natural hunter-gatherer decline after 50. The dashed line is Medicine 2.0 longer life, but still a big health decline in middle age, leading to that long marginal decade.
And then there's the ideal trajectory, the long dashed line. Health span stays strong, maybe even improves into the 50s and 60s. You stay vital much longer. Then, when decline comes, it's steeper but much shorter, right at the very end.
That's the compression of morbidity.
Exactly. Reducing that period of sickness and disability, creating those bonus decades. The goal isn't just more years, but more healthy, functional, engaged years.
So the big question, how do we actually do that? He brings in Sun Tzu. Strategy without tactics is the slowest road to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat.
That quote is absolutely central. People always want the tactics first. What do I eat? What exercises? What supplements? But without an overarching strategy, those tactics are just noise, disconnected actions.
He uses the Ollie versus Foreman rumble in the jungle fight to illustrate this.
Perfectly. Ollie's goal: beat Foreman, reclaim title. Foreman was younger, stronger, a knockout machine. Ollie couldn't just outpunch him.
So his strategy was?
Exhaust Foreman. Make him angry, make him waste energy, level the playing field by tiring him out.
And the tactics followed from that strategy.
Exactly. The light, irritating jabs to provoke Foreman, then the famous rope-a-dope, lean on the ropes, cover up, let Foreman punch himself out while Ollie absorbed the punishment and conserved energy. By round 5, Foreman was spent. Ollie won by KO in the 8th.
So tactics are what you do. Strategy is how you think about it.
Based on understanding the opponent aging, chronic disease, and your own strengths and weaknesses, longevity is way more complex than preventing sunburn. It demands a real strategy.
And his strategy focuses on fighting the 3 main vectors of health span decline.
Yes, he breaks down how health deteriorates.
Correct.
Cognitive decline. Not just forgetting keys, but lower processing, memory issues, loss of executive function, even personality changes, losing your perceived self. Goal: minimize this.
Second, physical decline.
Physical decline. Loss of muscle, strength, bone density, endurance, stability, balance. Leads to chronic pain, inability to do basic activities of daily living, ADLs, cooking, walking, bathing. Think of Sophie's fall, triggering her downward spiral.
And third, emotional health.
Emotional health. This can hit any time, often rooted in earlier life experiences. He notes unhappiness often peaks around 47. His therapist, Esther Perel, asked him a profound question. If you're so unhappy, why would you want to live longer? This is just as critical as the physical and cognitive parts. True death is inevitable, but he argues the slow decay beforehand is largely optional.
That's a huge undertaking. But he boils the strategy down to 5 key levers or domains.
Right. And these aren't abstract things you do occasionally. He says we literally eat, breathe, and sleep them. They have to be part of daily life. The 5 are exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional health, and exogenous molecules, drug supplements.
He's not anti-medication then.
Not at all. He sees things like statins as essential tools when used properly, informed by data. But let's focus on the first 4, which are mostly in our control. Exercise. By far the most potent longevity drug. Nothing else comes close for extending lifespan and protecting physical and cognitive function.
And he breaks exercise down.
Into strength, stability, aerobic efficiency, and peak aerobic capacity, VO2 max. The goal isn't just looks or weight loss, it's freedom from pain and disability. He actually ranks exercise above nutrition now in its overall impact.
Okay, nutrition. He avoids the diet wars.
Steers clear. His approach is biochemistry and individual physiology. How much you eat, calories often matters more than the specific type, though quality is important too. Yeah. The optimal Goldilocks zone varies hugely. Technology like CGMs helps find your pattern. It's evidence-informed, adaptable, personal.
Then sleep, the one we often neglect.
He admits he neglected it for years, saw it as an inconvenience. But it's crucial for physiological repair, especially brain health. Lack of sleep triggers terrible cascades. Insulin resistance, cognitive decline, mental health issues. He realized his biggest problem wasn't diet or exercise, but too little sleep.
And finally, emotional health.
He acknowledges this is less about hard science for him, more about personal, often painful experience. But he argues it's fundamentally as important as the others. His own struggles serve as a cautionary tale. What's the point of a long life if you're miserable?
It's clear he values this evidence-informed approach, but he also flags the problems with using traditional clinical trials, RCTs, for longevity research.
That's a really critical point. RCTs are the gold standard for short-term cause and effect, like testing a vaccine or a drug's immediate impact. But you can't run a 5-year trial to understand diseases that take decades to develop.
You can't track people for 60 years.
Exactly. You can't randomize babies to different diets and follow them for a century. It's impossible, ethically and logistically. So his solution is option B.
Triangulating data from different sources.
Precisely 5 sources. 1. Centenarian studies looking at people who live to 100 plus in good health. What can we learn from these outliers? 2. Animal models, mice, worms, dogs, monkeys. Faster lifespans, ethical testing. If something works across species, take it seriously.
3.
Human studies of the 4 horsemen. How do these diseases start, progress, what drives them? What can we learn from their pathology for prevention? 4. Molecular and mechanistic insights understanding the cellular changes of aging and how to manipulate them.
And the 5th, Mendelian randomization, sounded really clever, using genetics as natural experiments.
It's a brilliant tool. It helps figure out cause and effect when RCTs aren't feasible. For example, some studies linked low LDL cholesterol to higher cancer risk. Scary, right? Would statins cause cancer?
Yeah, that's worrying.
MR looked at people with natural genetic variations causing lifelong low, medium, or high LDL. Because genes are randomly assigned at birth, like in an RCT, it's unbiased. MR showed LDL does not cause cancer, but using the same method, it does show high LDL causes heart disease. It cuts through correlation noise.
So putting all 5 sources together, you don't get absolute certainty.
No, he admits absolute certainty is conspicuously absent. Biology is messy. The goal is to reduce our uncertainty as much as possible. You're aiming for your personal longevity alpha, an edge over average outcomes, like investing through consistent small changes. And your strategy isn't fixed. It will evolve as needed.
That makes sense. Which leads us nicely into the lessons from those ultimate outliers, the centenarians. I love how he starts with those almost unbelievable anecdotes about their secrets.
They're pretty great, aren't they?
Well,
Richard Overton living to 112 on whiskey and cigars never inhaled, he claimed. Henry Allingham hitting 113 thanks to cigarettes, whiskey, and wild, wild women.
And John Coleman, riding her bike at 100, smoking till 117, eating a pound of chocolate a week, living to 122.
Don't forget, Mildred Bauer's daily 4 p.m. beer at 106. Teresa Rowley's Diet Coke habit at 104. Ruth Benjamin's swearing by bacon at 109, or Emma Morano's 3 eggs a day to 117.
It's hilarious. Like, He says if aliens studied us using only lifestyle magazines, they'd think the secret was breakfast specials at Denny's, washed down with Jim Beam and a good cigar.
Exactly. It perfectly captures our wish for that one simple, maybe even indulgent secret. But then you look at the real signs, like the studies on Ashkenazi Jewish centenarians.
And the picture changes completely.
Completely. They weren't necessarily paragons of healthy living. Many drank, smoked, or overweight. Some studies even found the centenarian men exercised less at 70 than their peers who didn't live as long. So much for the perfect lifestyle being the only answer.
And just how rare are these people?
Extremely rare. About 1 in 3,333 people in the U.S. reach 100. Supercentenarians 110 plus are even rarer, maybe 300 worldwide. He points out there are about 9 billionaires for every one supercentenarian. Gene Kelman at 122 is such an outlier, some think 120 might even be the absolute human limit.
So if it's not just habits, and it's so rare, is it all down to lucky genes?
Genetics plays a big role, especially for extreme longevity. Twin studies show genetics explains maybe 20–30% of lifespan variation generally, but it seems much more important for reaching a 100-plus map.
Like having a centenarian sibling massively increases your chances.
8 times more likely if it's a sister, 17 times if it's a brother, which might make you think, well, if I don't have those genes, what's the point?
But that's where phenotype mimicry comes in.
Exactly. This is the hopeful part. Can we, through our choices and behaviors, mimic the effects of those longevity genes, even if we don't have the genes themselves? Attia believes, and the whole book argues, absolutely yes. We can copy the phenotype, the outcome, even without the genotype, the genes.
It's huge for most of us. So if it's not whiskey and bacon, what is the real secret of centenarians?
The real secret, the key difference, is compression of morbidity. They don't necessarily avoid disease altogether, but they get chronic diseases decades later than average people.
They delay the onset.
Massively. Average cancer diagnosis is around 72. For centenarians, it's closer to 100, almost 30 years later. Heart disease diagnosis hits a quarter of people by 75. For centenarians, it's 92, 17 years later. Same pattern for osteoporosis, stroke, dementia, hypertension.
So the older you get, the healthier you were.
That's the paradox Dr. Pearls noted. And supercentenarians, 105 plus, are often even healthier than regular centenarians. It suggests incredible biological resilience.
He calls it a phase shift caused by their genes.
Yeah, like their genes shifted their whole lifespan and health span curve 10, 20, even 30 years to the right. They're biologically younger. At 60, their arteries might look like a 35-year-old's. And when they do decline, it's often quick and steep. Right at the end, that's the compression of morbidity. Less time spent sick and disabled.
How do they do it, and how can we do it?
Well, specific genes like FXO3 and APOE2 are involved, but there's no single longevity gene. It's usually hundreds or thousands of small genetic factors working together.
Which is good news for us non-centenarian types.
Exactly. It means small incremental changes can add up. Take APOE. It has variants E2, E3, E4. E4 increases Alzheimer's risk significantly. But E2 protects against dementia, boosts longevity odds by 30%, and affects cholesterol and glucose metabolism. It links cognitive health, lipids, and metabolism.
And FOXO3, the maintenance department.
Good anatomy. It activates genes for cell health, repair, metabolism, stem cell care, waste cleanup, autophagy. And here's the kicker. Our behavior can activate FOXO3. Things like mild nutrient stress, intermittent fasting, or exercise can switch it on.
So the secret is resilience. They resist disease. We have to cultivate it.
Precisely. And this highlights a flaw in Medicine 2.0, treating diseases separately. Centenarians show these diseases often share common aging drivers. Our strategy needs to be comprehensive, targeting those common drivers proactively.
Okay, let's shift to part 5, the crisis of abundance, focusing on metabolic health as the foundation. He starts with that intriguing medical mystery from his early career.
Yeah, the colon cancer surgery patient. Non-drinker, but his liver looked terrible, fatty, inflamed, like a bad foie gras, as Attia put it. Baffled the whole surgical team.
And it reminded him of an older case.
Samuel Zellman's 1970s report. A hospital worker who drank 20-plus Cokes a day and also had a fatty liver. Attia realized these weren't isolated incidents. They were early signs of a silent epidemic. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, and its inflammatory cousin, NASH.
And this is incredibly common now.
Frighteningly so. About a quarter of the global population has NAFLD-NASH, most completely unaware. It often gets missed because standard liver enzyme tests, like ALT, might look normal, even when the liver isn't healthy. The thresholds for normal keep getting adjusted downwards as the population average worsens.
But it's reversible.
Thankfully, yes, especially with weight loss and lifestyle changes. The liver is remarkably resilient, but if untreated, NASH can lead to cirrhosis, and is on track to be the top reason for liver transplants by 2025.
And NAFLD NASH is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. It's a visible sign of a much bigger global metabolic dysfunction epidemic encompassing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes.
Which leads to his crucial point. Focus less on obesity and more on metabolic dysfunction as the real problem.
Yes, a really important reframing. Over 40% of Americans are obese, BMI 30. But he argues obesity is largely a symptom of the deeper metabolic issue, not the root cause itself.
This goes back to metabolic syndrome, or METSIN.
Right. First identified as Syndrome X in the 60s. It's a cluster. High blood pressure, high triglycerides, low HDL, good cholesterol, belly fat, central adiposity, and high fasting glucose. Having 3 or more means you have METSIN.
And huge numbers of people have it.
Nearly 120 million Americans meet the criteria. An incredible 90% meet at least one criterion. It's pervasive.
But here's the really unsettling part. You don't have to be obese to have it. Lean people can be metabolically unhealthy too.
This is absolutely critical. Up to 40% of non-obese adults are metabolically unhealthy by these standards. They might look thin, have a normal BMI, but internally they're accumulating dangerous visceral fat around their organs because their capacity to store fat safely under the skin, subcutaneous fat, is limited.
So they might be at higher risk than someone heavier but metabolically healthier?
Potentially, yes. Triple the risk for mortality and heart events compared to metabolically healthy lean people. That's why Attia stresses everyone, even if you're lean, needs to pay attention to metabolic health. It's way deeper than what you see on the surface.
Okay, so how does metabolism actually go wrong? He uses the donut analogy for where calories go.
It's a great way to explain it. Eat that donut, the carbs break down into glucose. Your body has 2 main places to put it immediately. First, glycogen short-term storage in muscles mostly, and liver. You can store maybe 1,600 calories worth, enough for a couple of hours of hard exercise.
And beyond.
Beyond that limited glycogen storage, the body's amazing at storing excess energy as fat. Even a lean person might have 90,000 calories stored as fat.
And insulin is the traffic controller.
Exactly. Insulin helps shuttle glucose into cells. Now, here's the surprising part. Subcutaneous fat, under the skin, is the safest place to store excess calories. It's a metabolic buffer, designed to soak up energy for later. That's how we evolved to survive famine.
But what happens when that safe storage, the subcutaneous fat, gets full? That's the bathtub analogy, right?
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Your subcutaneous fat is the bathtub. Keep the faucet running,
Yeah.
too many calories, with the drain closed, not enough activity, and eventually it overflows.
And the overflow goes into dangerous places.
Exactly. It spills out as excess triglycerides in the blood, fat deposited in the liver, and AFLD, fat infiltrating muscle tissue causing insulin resistance, even fat around the heart and pancreas. This is ectopic fat.
And visceral fat, the stuff around organs, is particularly bad.
Very bad. Unlike subcutaneous fat, it's metabolically active, pumping out inflammatory chemicals, cytokines, that drive systemic inflammation, linking it directly to cancer and heart disease risk. And people's bathtub size varies hugely based on genetics. Some people overflow much sooner even if they look lean. That's why he advocates for DMD scans to measure visceral fat specifically.
So this overflow, this ectopic fat, triggers insulin resistance, like a domino effect.
Precisely. Research shows insulin resistance often starts subtly in the muscles. Tiny fat droplets infiltrate the muscle cells, messing up the machinery that lets glucose in. The cells become deaf to insulin.
That's the balloon analogy, harder to inflate.
Right. The pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin, like blowing harder on the balloon, just to get the same amount of glucose into the increasingly resistant cells. This state is called hyperinsulinemia, high insulin levels.
And initially, blood sugar might still look normal.
Yes, the pancreas compensates heroically at first, masking the underlying problem. But those high post-meal insulin spikes are a critical early warning sign.
Why is high insulin itself so bad?
Because insulin isn't just about sugar, it's a powerful growth signal. It promotes atherosclerosis, plaque buildup, and helps cancer cells proliferate. This whole metabolic mess, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, is driving the diseases of civilization.
Things like type 2 diabetes, which used to be rare.
Exactly. Now over 11% of U.S. adults have it. Another 38% have prediabetes. Why? Our ancient genes, optimized for storing fat during scarcity, are totally mismatched to our modern world of cheap, abundant calories and inactivity.
And he points a specific finger at fructose, especially liquid
He
fructose.
does. Fructose, especially from sodas and juices, is metabolized differently than glucose. It generates a lot of uric acid linked to gout, high blood pressure.
And there's that evolutionary theory about the uricase enzyme.
Yeah, the idea that losing the enzyme that breaks down uric acid helped our ancestors convert fructose to fat more efficiently for survival in colder climates. A lifesaver, then. A liability now in our sugar-soaked world.
So fructose basically tricks the body into thinking it's starving.
Pretty much. It promotes more eating and fat storage, even when we're overloaded with energy. It's a metabolic deception.
All of this just screams the need for early intervention. Waiting for that type 2 diabetes diagnosis is too late.
Way too late. By the time your HbA1c is over 6.5%, the standard medicine 2.0 diagnostic point, you're already at high risk for complications, and reversal is much harder. Medicine 3.0 focuses on those early warning signs years before diagnosis.
Like elevated uric acid, inflammation markers, liver enzymes.
And crucially, elevated insulin, especially post-meal insulin spikes measured by an oral glucose tolerance test, OGTT. That hyperinsulinemia is the canary in the coal mine.
Because insulin resistance is linked to all the four horsemen.
Massively. Increases risk of cancer, 12x, Alzheimer's 5x, cardiovascular death, nearly 6x. It's a common denominator. Attia finds it baffling that doctors don't treat high insulin like other hormone imbalances. We just wait and do nothing until full-blown diabetes hits.
But the good news is we can do something about it.
Absolutely. Lifestyle changes, exercise, diet, sleep can prevent and often reverse this. But it takes real, sustained effort to fight against the default modern environment that pushes us towards metabolic disaster.
Okay, let's tackle the deadliest horseman, heart disease. His personal story here is potent uncles dying young, his own risk factors despite feeling healthy.
Yeah, it really personalizes the threat. Heart disease tends to find you, as he says, and the most common symptom. Often, tragically, it's sudden death.
Grim, and the stats are staggering. Leading killer globally.
2,300 deaths a day in the U.S., 10 times more fatal for U.S. women than breast cancer. His own wake-up call, that calcium score of 6 at 36 when it should be 0, despite feeling fit, was terrifying because it showed the silent damage already happening. And the advice, wait and see.
Which he clearly rejected. He goes on to bust some major myths about heart disease.
2 huge ones. First, that dietary cholesterol causes heart disease. Nonsense, he says, quoting Ansel Keys himself. Dietary cholesterol doesn't matter a bit. Most cholesterol in our blood is made by our own bodies, not absorbed from food. Eating eggs didn't cause the epidemic.
And the second myth, that it's an old person's disease.
Equally wrong and dangerous. Half of major heart events in men, a third in women, happen before 65, a quarter in men before 54. The process, atherosclerosis, starts early. Fatty streaks in teens, plaques in the 20s and 30s. It's a decades-long process.
So let's get into that process. His crime scene analogy for atherosclerosis.
It's a great way to visualize it. Artery is the street. Artery wall, the houses. Endothelium, inner lining, is the fence. LDL particles, carrying cholesterol and the ApoB protein, can slip through the fence into the front porch, subendothelial space.
And that's where the trouble starts, oxidation.
That's the trigger. The LDL gets oxidized by reactive molecules. It's the oxidized LDL that kicks off the whole cascade. It attracts immune cells, monocytes, which turn into macrophages, gobbling up the oxidized LDL.
Becoming foam cells.
Exactly. They look like soap bubbles under the microscope. These foam cells clump together, forming fatty streaks, the earliest stage, common even in teens. HDL, good cholesterol, tries to help by removing cholesterol, but often the process continues.
Then the plaque forms properly.
The foam cells fuse, creating a toxic lipid core. Smooth muscle cells migrate and form a fibrous cap over it, like pouring concrete over Chernobyl. That's the plaque is. It is damage. It can harden with calcium, calcification, another sign of damage. But the real danger is when it becomes unstable and ruptures.
Leading to blood clots, heart attacks, strokes.
Right. The ruptured plaque exposes its contents, triggering a clot that blocks the artery.
So it's really clear. The issue isn't cholesterol itself, but the particles carrying it, especially specific ones like ApoB and LPA.
Absolutely crucial distinction. Every single particle that causes atherosclerosis carries the ApoB protein. So the number of ApoB particles is a much better predictor of risk than your standard LDL-C number.
Which just measures the cholesterol inside the particles.
Exactly. Attia urges everyone, ask your doctor for an ApoB test. It's cheap and gives much better information about the actual number of potentially dangerous particles.
And then there's LPA, lipoprotein A, the silent killer.
A particularly nasty one. It's an LDL particle fused with another protein, ARPA, which has structures that promote clotting and stop clots from breaking down. It gets into the artery wall easily and accelerates plaque and clot formation.
Often causing heart attacks in seemingly healthy younger people, like Bob Harper.
Precisely, a classic example. And LPA is highly genetic. It's probably the most common inherited risk factor for early heart disease, yet it's often completely missed.
So if you have a family history of early heart disease, getting LPA tested is critical.
Absolutely essential, Attia insists. Levels are set for life, so you only need to test once. Around 20–30% of people have levels high enough to significantly increase risk. Awareness is growing, but it's still under-tested.
So looking back at Attia's own risk factors in his 30s, high ApoB, oxidized LDL, the calcium score, inflammation, insulin resistance, it's a perfect storm.
It shows how these factors converge. He argues you need all three for atherosclerosis to really take hold: the lipid burden, ApoB, particle modification, oxidation, and inflammation. But the great news is many of these are modifiable through lifestyle and, when needed, medication.
His core message is ultimately hopeful then. Heart disease doesn't have to be the #1 killer.
That's the powerful takeaway. It should be the 10th leading cause of death, not the first. It's largely preventable and controllable if we tackle it early and proactively using the principles of Medicine 3.0.
Wow. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today in this deep dive into Peter Attia's Outlive. We started with that really vivid falling eggs dream.
Which perfectly set up the shift from Medicine 2.0's reactive catching eggs to Medicine 3.0's proactive goal of stopping the egg thrower.
And we saw how Medicine 3.0 isn't just an update. It's a whole new philosophy, prioritizing prevention, treating you as a unique individual, honestly assessing risk, including doing nothing, and crucially, focusing on health span, not just lifespan.
Avoiding that marginal decade, aiming for bonus decades, and emphasizing that you are the captain of your ship, the active driver of your own longevity journey.
We mapped out the strategy, understanding the 5 pillars exercise as the most potent drug, personalized nutrition, fundamental sleep, vital emotional health, and the smart use of exogenous molecules.
And we learned from centenarians their secret isn't just habits, but that amazing compression of morbidity, delaying disease by decades. And the key idea of phenotype mimicry. We can aim for their resilience, even without their genes.
We tackled the crisis of abundance, seeing metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance as the foundational issue linking the 4 horsemen, and demystified heart disease, moving beyond cholesterol to crucial markers like ApoB and LPA.
Yeah, the listener really needs to be asking about those.
Ultimately, Outlive shows us that while aging and death are inevitable, that slow, painful decay, the marginal decade, well, it seems that's largely optional. That gives us incredible agency.
It's transformative, isn't it? We have the knowledge and the tools now to actively change our trajectory. So the question for you listening right now is, what concrete, specific action can you take today? Maybe it's about exercise, nutrition, sleep. Maybe it's booking that doctor's appointment to ask about ApoB or LPA. What step can you take to start shifting away from decline and towards your vibrant bonus decades?
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about adding years to life.
It's about adding life to those years. How will you define, pursue, and really live your bonus decades?